3:38 in the morning, January 24th, 1961, pitch black over the frozen tobacco fields of North Carolina. Inside a B-52 Stratofortress bomber flying at 38,000 feet, Captain William Seymour felt something wrong through his control stick. A shudder, then another. In the bomb bay beneath his feet, 2 Mark 39 hydrogen bombs, each one 260 times more powerful than the weapon that erased Hiroshima, hung in their cradles as the aircraft began to tear itself apart. What happened next would remain buried in classified documents for over 50 years. When the truth finally emerged, nuclear weapons designers would use a single word to describe how close America came to accidentally nuking itself that night. Terrifying. The 8-man crew of Keep 19 Ahead had launched from Seymour Johnson Air Force Base near Goldsboro, North Carolina, 11 hours earlier. This was supposed to be another routine Chrome Dome mission, one of those mind-numbing aerial patrols that kept nuclear-armed bombers constantly airborne during the coldest years of the Cold War. Major Eugene Shelton commanded the aircraft. His co-pilot, First Lieutenant Adam Maddox, had flown this exact route dozens of times before. Circle up the Atlantic coast. Rendezvous with a tanker aircraft for mid-air refueling. Continue the patrol. Land 12 hours later. Simple. Except tonight, nothing would be simple. The first sign of trouble came during that midnight refueling over the Atlantic. As the KC-135 tanker maneuvered into position above them, its crew noticed something disturbing. Fuel was streaming from the B-52's right wing. Not a small leak, a torrent. The tanker's boom operator, Staff Sergeant Robert Johnson, watched in disbelief as jet fuel poured from the bomber's wing tank, vaporizing instantly in the sub-zero air at altitude. Major Walter Tulloch, commanding the tanker, radioed the bomber immediately. The B-52 had already taken on 48,000 pounds of fuel. But something had ruptured. The structural integrity of that right wing was now in serious question. Shelton made the only decision he could. Abort the mission. Return to base. But first, they needed to burn off enough fuel to land safely. For the next 2 hours, the wounded bombers circled over North Carolina, dumping fuel, trying to reduce weight. The crew went through their emergency checklist methodically. No one mentioned what everyone was thinking, that 2 thermonuclear weapons with a combined yield of 7.6 megatons were along for this increasingly dangerous ride. By 3:30 in the morning, Shelton had descended to 10,000 feet. Preparing for an emergency landing at Seymour Johnson. The base was now just 40 miles away. They were going to make it. Then the right wing failed. Lieutenant Maddox would later describe it as feeling like the hand of God had reached down and snapped the aircraft in half. The 8-engine bomber, all 600,000 pounds of it, suddenly lurched into an uncontrollable spin, the cockpit filled with the shriek of tearing metal. Warning lights exploded across the instrument panel like fireworks. The G-forces pinned the crew to their seats as the aircraft tumbled through the darkness. Shelton fought the controls, but the B-52 was no longer an aircraft. It was becoming debris. He gave the order everyone dreaded. Bail out. But bailing out of a disintegrating B-52 at night is nothing like the movies. The centrifugal forces were so powerful that several crew members couldn't move. Maddox, younger and stronger than most, managed to reach his ejection seat handle. The explosive bolts fired, launching him into the freezing January night. His parachute opened automatically. Below him, he watched his aircraft, what remained of it, spinning earthward like a massive, flaming pinwheel. Not everyone was as fortunate as Maddox. Sergeant Francis Barnish never made it out. His body would later be found in the wreckage, still strapped to his seat. Major Shelton and Captain Charles Rawdon ejected but died on impact with the ground. Their parachutes either failed to deploy properly or they were already unconscious from the violent forces of the aircraft's destruction. 5 men survived. 3 died. But the human tragedy was about to become a potential nuclear catastrophe. If you're finding this story as gripping as it is terrifying, consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the Old Breed channel. We bring you the military history stories that shaped our world, stories that often remained classified for decades. As the B-52 broke apart, the 2 Mark 39 bombs separated from the aircraft. Each weapon was 12 feet long, weighed approximately 7,700 pounds, and contained enough destructive power to obliterate everything within an 8-mile radius. The bombs began their own separate journeys toward the tobacco fields below. The first bomb's parachute deployed exactly as designed. This was part of the weapon's normal delivery sequence, a 64-foot silk parachute meant to slow the bomb's descent, giving the delivery aircraft time to escape the blast zone. But this wasn't a normal delivery. This was an accident. And that parachute deployment meant the bomb was now executing what it thought was an actual nuclear attack sequence. Lieutenant Jack Revell was sound asleep at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base when his phone rang. As the base's explosive ordnance disposal officer, the man responsible for dealing with nuclear weapons mishaps, Revell had trained for this moment. But training and reality are different beasts entirely. The voice on the other end of the line was terse. "We've got a broken arrow." Broken arrow. The code phrase that meant America had lost a nuclear weapon. Revell threw on his uniform and raced to the command post. The initial reports were confused, fragmentary. A B-52 down. Crew members scattered across Nahunta Swamp. And somewhere out there in the darkness, 2 hydrogen bombs. By the time Revell and his team reached the first bomb's location, near the community of Faro, North Carolina, the sun was beginning to rise. What they found defied belief. The Mark 39 was standing perfectly upright in a farmer's field, its parachute draped over some nearby trees like a giant silk ghost. The weapon had buried itself about 18 inches into the soft earth, nose down, looking for all the world like a bizarre piece of modern art. Revell approached the weapon carefully. The Mark 39 had 6 safety mechanisms, 6 separate devices designed to prevent accidental detonation. As he examined the bomb, his blood ran cold. The parachute deployment wasn't supposed to happen in a safe weapon. That was safety mechanism number 1. Failed. He carefully removed an access panel on the side of the bomb. Inside, he could see the sequence timer. It had activated. That was safety mechanism number 2. Failed. The battery that powered the weapon's trigger circuit was actively supplying power. Safety mechanism number 3. Failed. Revell's hands were steady, but his mind was racing through the implications. Out of 6 safety mechanisms, 3 had already activated. This bomb had gone through the same arming sequence it would follow in an actual nuclear strike. The only reason it hadn't detonated was a single low-voltage switch, a piece of technology so simple you could buy one at a hardware store for $2.99. But where was the second bomb? 5 miles away, near the town of Eureka, Walter Gregg had been woken by what sounded like thunder. But thunder doesn't usually shake your entire house, and it doesn't usually happen in January. The 40-year-old farmer looked out his window and saw nothing unusual in the pre-dawn darkness. He went back to bed. When the sun rose, Gregg discovered what had actually happened. In his field, where yesterday there had been solid ground, there was now a crater. Not just any crater, a hole nearly 200 feet wide and 40 feet deep, already beginning to fill with muddy water from the high water table. At the bottom of this instant lake was the second Mark 39. This bomb hadn't been as lucky as its twin. While the first weapon's parachute had deployed, slowing its descent to a survivable impact, the second bomb had plummeted to Earth at nearly 700 miles per hour. It had literally hammered itself into atoms, scattering radioactive fragments deep into the North Carolina soil. Ravel's team began what would become one of the most challenging excavation projects in military history. They had to recover every piece of that second bomb, especially the plutonium core, the pit that would have initiated the thermonuclear reaction. The problem was that the bomb had driven itself so deep into the swampy ground that conventional excavation was impossible. The crater kept filling with water, the walls kept collapsing, and somewhere down there was enough plutonium to contaminate the groundwater for 3 counties. The Air Force brought in pumps. They brought in engineers. They brought in equipment normally used for mining operations. Day after day, week after week, they dug 8 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet. The deeper they went, the more unstable the excavation became. Meanwhile, Ravel's team had carefully removed the first bomb from its standing position in the farmer's field. When they got it back to the base and fully examined it, the true scope of the near disaster became clear. That single safety switch, officially called the MC-772 arm safe switch, was all that had prevented detonation. One single electromechanical component, about the size of a cigarette pack, had stood between North Carolina and nuclear annihilation. But the implications went far beyond North Carolina. A 3.8 megaton detonation would have created a fireball over a mile wide, with temperatures exceeding 20 million degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than the surface of the sun. Everything within 4 miles would have been vaporized instantly. The blast wave would have leveled buildings up to 16 miles away. And that was just the immediate effects. The radioactive fallout would have been catastrophic. With the prevailing winds that January night, a lethal cloud of radiation would have drifted northeast across Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and potentially as far as New York City and Boston. Millions of Americans would have been exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. The death toll could have reached into the hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, depending on evacuation efficiency and wind patterns. Consider the timing. This was January 1961. John F. Kennedy had been president for exactly 4 days. The Bay of Pigs invasion was 3 months away. The Cuban Missile Crisis was still 21 months in the future. If a multi-megaton nuclear weapon had detonated on American soil, even accidentally, how would the Soviet Union have responded? Would they have believed it was an accident? Or would they have assumed it was some kind of first strike gone wrong, requiring immediate retaliation? We're bringing you these declassified stories that reveal just how close we've come to disaster. If you're learning something new, help us reach more history enthusiasts by subscribing to The Old Breed and sharing this video with someone who appreciates military history. Back at the excavation site, the situation was deteriorating. The team had recovered pieces of the bomb, twisted metal fragments, electronic components, chunks of the explosive lenses that would have compressed the plutonium core. But the core itself remained elusive. They dug for 8 days straight, fighting against collapsing walls and rising groundwater. Finally, at a depth of 42 feet, they made a disturbing discovery. Parts of the bomb had been driven even deeper, possibly as deep as 180 feet, according to some estimates. The plutonium core was almost certainly down there, far below any depth they could reasonably excavate. The water table made deeper digging impossible without massive engineering projects that would have taken months and attracted enormous public attention. The Air Force made a controversial decision. They would recover what they could and entomb the rest. They bought an easement from farmer Walter Gregg, a 400-foot circle of land that would remain off-limits forever. Then they filled the crater with concrete and covered it with earth. Somewhere beneath that field, to this day, lies the plutonium core of a hydrogen bomb. The official Air Force report on the incident, when it was finally declassified decades later, contained a single, chilling admission. Parker Jones, a supervisor at Sandia National Laboratories who reviewed the accident, stated it plainly. One simple dynamo technology, low-voltage switch, stood between the United States and a major catastrophe. But even this understates the miracle of what didn't happen that night. That switch, the MC-772, was not some sophisticated piece of nuclear safety equipment. It was a simple relay switch that could be found in any number of household appliances. It had never been tested for the kind of forces it experienced during the bomber's breakup. There was no reason to believe it would survive such violence intact. Dr. Ralph Lapp, a physicist who worked on the Manhattan Project, later calculated that the bomb came within a hair's breadth of detonating. He estimated that the forces on that switch during the aircraft's destruction and the bomb's fall were at the very edge of its tolerance. A slightly different angle of impact, a moment more of vibration, a minor manufacturing defect. Any of these could have closed that circuit. The crew members who survived the crash carried the weight of that night for the rest of their lives. Adam Maddox, the co-pilot who managed to eject, never flew again. The image of his aircraft disappearing into the darkness, carrying 2 hydrogen bombs toward American soil, haunted him. He left the Air Force within a year and rarely spoke about the incident publicly. Jack Revell, the EOD officer who disarmed the standing bomb, kept a piece of that weapon's parachute in his home for the rest of his life. He would occasionally take it out and hold it, remembering how close America came to nuclear self-immolation. Revell passed away in 2017, but not before the full story of Goldsboro had finally been told. The incident forced a complete revision of American nuclear weapons safety protocols. The Mark 39 bombs were retrofitted with additional safety mechanisms. New procedures were implemented for airborne alert missions. Eventually, the entire Chrome Dome program, keeping nuclear-armed bombers constantly airborne, was discontinued, partly because of the Goldsboro incident and other near disasters. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Goldsboro broken arrow is how long it remained secret. For over 50 years, the American public had no idea how close they had come to nuclear catastrophe. The farmers around Goldsboro knew a plane had crashed. They knew the military had spent weeks digging in Walter Gregg's field. But the full truth, that a hydrogen bomb nearly detonated over North Carolina, remained classified until 2013. When the documents were finally released through the Freedom of Information Act, they revealed something even more disturbing. Goldsboro wasn't unique. Between 1950 and 1968, the United States military reported at least 32 broken arrow incidents, accidents involving nuclear weapons. How many of these came as close to disaster as Goldsboro? We may never know. Many of the reports remain heavily redacted or classified. Eric Schlosser, who spent years investigating American nuclear weapons accidents for his book, Command and Control, concluded that the Goldsboro incident was emblematic of a terrifying reality. For all our sophisticated technology and safety procedures, we have repeatedly come within a whisker of accidental nuclear war. Not through enemy action, not through presidential decision, but through simple mechanical failure, human error, and bad luck. Consider the arithmetic of probability. If that single switch had a 99% reliability rate, which would be considered excellent for most mechanical components, then there was still a 1% chance of detonation. 1%. Those aren't comfortable odds when the stakes involve millions of lives and potentially triggering a nuclear war. The Mark 39 bomb that nearly detonated over Goldsboro contained more destructive power than all the conventional explosives used in World War II, including the atomic bombs dropped on Japan combined. And it came down to a switch that any electrical engineer would describe as rudimentary. Today, if you drive through Goldsboro, North Carolina, there's no monument to mark what almost happened. No historical marker explains that this quiet corner of tobacco country nearly became ground zero for an accidental nuclear holocaust. The crater where the second bomb buried itself has long since been filled and farmed around. Only a small circle of restricted land, still owned by the Air Force, hints at the radioactive secret that lies beneath. But for those who know the story, Goldsboro represents something profound about the nuclear age. We live in a world where human beings have built weapons capable of ending civilization. And we've trusted those weapons to technologies that can and do fail. We've normalized the existence of devices that could kill millions in an instant, telling ourselves that our safety mechanisms are foolproof. Goldsboro proves they're not. The farmers who lived through that night in 1961 often reported the same detail. In the moments after the crash, before the sun rose, there was an eerie glow on the horizon where the aircraft had impacted. Some thought it was fire from the wreckage. Others wondered if they were seeing something worse, the first light of a nuclear detonation. They weren't, of course. That glow was just burning jet fuel and magnesium from the aircraft's structure. But for a few hours in the darkness of a January morning, the difference between what was and what could have been came down to the mechanical reliability of a single switch inside a falling nuclear bomb. The technical specifications of that switch have never been fully declassified. We know it was a low-voltage mechanism. We know it was one of the earliest generation safety devices. We know it worked when 3 others failed. What we don't know is why. Was it luck? Superior manufacturing? Divine intervention? The official reports don't speculate. Lieutenant Revell, reflecting on the incident years later, put it more bluntly than any official document ever would. "We were just damn lucky," he said. "That's all. Just damn lucky." The Goldsboro Broken Arrow remains the closest the United States has ever come to an accidental nuclear detonation on its own soil. It happened not during a crisis, not during heightened tensions with the Soviet Union, but during a routine training flight on a quiet January night. It happened because a fuel leak led to structural failure. It nearly resulted in catastrophe because our safety systems weren't as safe as we believed. In the decades since, nuclear weapons have presumably become safer. Modern bombs have more sophisticated safety mechanisms, better designed to prevent accidental detonation. But they've also become more powerful, more numerous, and spread among more nations. The lesson of Goldsboro isn't just about American weapons or Cold War accidents. It's about the fundamental danger of maintaining devices that can end millions of lives in an instant, no matter how many safety features we add. Today, there are approximately 13,000 nuclear weapons in the world. Each one is a Goldsboro waiting to happen, a complex machine that we trust to work perfectly every single time, forever. The switch that saved North Carolina in 1961 was never designed to carry such weight. No switch ever could be. Did you know that one of the bombs from the Goldsboro incident still has radioactive components buried beneath a North Carolina field to this day? Share your thoughts in the comments and help us bring more of these untold military history stories to light by subscribing to the Old Breed channel. The 8 men aboard Keep 19. Ahead that night were ordinary airmen doing their duty during extraordinary times. 3 of them paid with their lives. 5 survived to bear witness. They were part of a nuclear force that stood ready to end the world if ordered, flying an aircraft loaded with weapons that could destroy entire cities. On January 24th, 1961, they nearly destroyed their own country by accident. The story of Goldsboro is ultimately a story about the razor's edge we've walked since the dawn of the nuclear age. It's about the faith we place in technology and the terrible consequences when that technology fails. It's about secrets kept for decades and truths that emerge long after they could have informed public debate. Most of all, it's about a single switch, a simple, mechanical device that held the fate of millions in its tiny metal contacts. That switch held, this time,